Hello, my name is Michael Arden, and for my statistical research project, I chose to look at the lengths between polar bears in the two different seas. So, for my research question hypothesis, I came up with is the mean length of adult polar bears in the Chukchi Sea smaller than the mean length of the adult polar bears in the Beaufort Sea? So, on the map here on the left, you can see where that's located in the world. So, it's above Alaska. It's in a good polar bear range there. So, to determine the different hypotheses for the null hypothesis, the location does not affect polar bear size, and there will be no difference in average lengths of the polar bears in the Chukchi Sea and the Beaufort Sea. And we can see that represented by the symbols there as well. So, you have the mean of group one will equal the mean of group two. And then for the alternative hypothesis, which would, contradict the null one, since the polar bears in the Beaufort Sea live farther north, they will be larger than the polar bears in the Chukchi Sea, and they will on average be longer in length. So the data source, I found a good source of data through the Alaska Science Center. It was collected by the U.S. Geological Service and the U.S. Fish and Game Wildlife Service. So they went through and captured bears from 1981 to 2017, and then they measured the body length, the body mass, the auxiliary girth, the skull width, and the tail lengths. For me, I'm just concerned of the overall body length for my research question, but it's a good grouping of data, and the fact that they've done it for so long, it means that it's going to be a good amount of data to use to give a good answer on that. So looking at the descriptive stats and the graphs, so the bar on the top there of the graph on the left is the Beaufort Sea, and the bar on the bottom is the Chukchi Sea. So right off the bat, if we look at the sample size, the only issue here is you have 1,833 out of 321. So the sample size is a little bit skewed to the one side. It could be that they focus their research in that particular Beaufort Sea area, or maybe there's just more polar bears in general in that area because it's a little bit farther north. But regardless, we can still use the data to look at the different means. So going to the right of that graph, you have the two means there. So 201.14855 versus 169.1134. So right off the bat, we can kind of determine that the alternative hypothesis would be true based off of this right here, that they do not, in fact, equal each other. And then it breaks down our standard deviation, our minimum, medium, and maximum are two different quadrants. And then you can have that represented by the graph on the right there as well. So if we get into the confidence interval, we have our upper and lower limits of the two different groups. So group one is the Beaufort Sea, and group two is the Chukchi Sea. So looking at the two different intervals we have there, we have that where 95% confidence interval shows us that if we measure the length of randomly selected polar bear, it would fall between 203.40146 and 198.89564 for the Beaufort Sea, and then 175.97675 and 162.25004 for the Chukchi Sea. We can also look at the overlap on those to determine whether or not the null hypothesis would be rejected. So if we look at that, we can clearly see that they do not overlap. Your upper limit of group two only comes to 175, where your lower limit of group one only goes to 198. So right off the bat, we can see they don't overlap, which means that null hypothesis would be rejected. So getting into actually testing the hypothesis, I chose a significance level of A equals 0.05 or 5%. And then ran that through that JMP program as well to get that data. So it popped out with a test statistic of 8.722299, and then it gave us a p-value of 0.0001. So we know that the null hypothesis should be rejected based on the p-value alone. So since the p-value equals 0.0001, it is less than 0.05, we know that it should be rejected, because if the p-value is less than the actual significance level, then the null hypothesis would be rejected. So in conclusion, we can determine that the null hypothesis would be rejected, as we just stated, since the probability of having similar means is less than the selected significance level of 0.05. This would mean that the alternative hypothesis is true, and the polar bears located in one of the seas will, on average, be longer than the polar bears in the other sea. We also know that from the confidence interval of those not overlapping as well. And just for some fun facts to give you some representation of polar bears, if you see here on the graph just how large polar bears are, you have your human on your left, and then the various different bears throughout the world going down to the right. So they're the largest bear in the world. Another interesting fact for you is the largest polar bear in the world was actually killed in 1960 in Alaska itself, and it weighed 2,210 pounds, which is pretty large for a polar bear. And then our references here for the data collection that we had as well. So thank you for checking out my research project. It's been fun. Thank you very much.